The Krithan war fleet appeared out of nowhere, dropping out of hyperspace right on top of the human diplomatic station. One moment the stars were peaceful and quiet. The next moment, massive black warships blocked out the sun, their hulls covered in weapons that could turn planets into dust. The station's alarms started screaming. People ran through the corridors in a panic. Ambassador Richard Hayes was in the middle of a boring afternoon meeting when his assistant burst through the door, face pale as a ghost. They had visitors, and they weren't the friendly kind. King Vorith didn't bother with pleasantries or diplomatic protocols. The alien monarch was absolutely massive, easily 10 feet tall, covered in dark scales that looked harder than steel. His eyes glowed red like hot coals, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled through the station's speakers like thunder. He had conquered 42 star systems, destroyed armies that numbered in the millions, and crushed civilizations that had stood for thousands of years. Now he was here for humanity. But Vorith wasn't interested in a full invasion. Not yet, anyway. He believed in the old ways, the warrior's code. He wanted to give humanity a chance, even if it was a slim one. Send forth your greatest warrior, he demanded. One fighter to face his champion in single combat. If the human won, his entire fleet would leave and humanity would earn respect across the galaxy. If the human lost, well, Earth and all its colonies would be reduced to smoking ruins within a week. The ambassador's hands shook as he tried to respond. He stammered something about needing time to discuss terms, to contact Earth's military command, to arrange proper procedures. Vorith gave him 6 hours. Not a second more. The station erupted into chaos. Military officers started making frantic calls to every naval base within 100 light years. Politicians argued about whether this was even legal under galactic law. Lawyers debated the fine print of combat rules. Nobody could agree on anything except one terrible fact: their best soldiers were too far away. The closest Special Forces unit would take 3 days to arrive. The Olympic combat team was on the other side of human space. Even if they scrambled every fast ship available, they couldn't get a proper warrior here in time. Some suggested sending whoever was available and hoping for mercy. Others wanted to fight back with the station's limited weapons, even though everyone knew that would just get them killed faster. A few prayed quietly in corners, hoping for a miracle that didn't seem likely to come. Through all this chaos, life on the station tried to continue in small ways. The cafeteria staff still served meals, though nobody had much appetite. Engineers kept the power running. Medical teams prepared for the worst. And the cleaning crew kept working, because someone had to, and sitting around worrying wouldn't help anything. Janet Morrison was mopping the floor outside the main conference room when she first heard the king's demand. She was 50 years old, with gray hair tied back in a practical bun and hands roughened by years of hard work. She'd been cleaning on this station for 15 years, ever since the accident that had taken her husband. The work was steady, the pay was decent, and it kept her busy enough that she didn't spend all day thinking about everything she'd lost. She'd heard a lot during her years here. Diplomats said things in front of cleaning staff that they'd never say in official meetings, as if the people who emptied their trash cans were invisible. Janet had learned to tune most of it out, but this was different. This was about survival. As she worked, she listened to the arguments echoing from the conference room. Officers throwing around tactical terms. Politicians worried about their careers. Everyone talking in circles while the clock ticked down. Nobody actually solving the problem. Janet kept cleaning, moving from room to room with the steady rhythm of long practice. But her mind was elsewhere, drifting back through memories she usually tried to keep buried. The Denver riots, when the food shortages had turned her neighborhood into a war zone and she'd barricaded her apartment for 3 weeks with nothing but a crowbar and determination. The lunar station siege, when pirates had taken over half the moon base where she'd been visiting her sister, and she'd spent 2 days hiding in the maintenance tunnels, helping injured people find safety. The Arctic colony collapse, when the heating systems failed during the worst storm in a century, and she'd dragged her supervisor through a whiteout blizzard after he'd broken his leg. She'd never thought of herself as brave. She just did what needed doing, kept putting one foot in front of the other, survived because giving up wasn't really an option. But she'd learned things during those experiences. How to stay calm when everything was falling apart. How to turn everyday objects into tools. How to read people and situations and find the angle nobody else was seeing. Janet finished mopping the corridor and looked through the conference room window. Inside, powerful people were still arguing, wasting precious time. Outside the station's viewports, the alien warships waited like patient predators. She thought about Earth. About the billions of people who would die if nobody stood up. About her daughter living in Seattle with 2 grandchildren Janet had only met through video calls. About the station crew, many of whom she'd worked alongside for years. Then Janet Morrison set down her mop, straightened her back, and walked into the conference room. Ambassador Hayes was mid-sentence, arguing with a general about jurisdiction, when he noticed the cleaning woman standing quietly by the door. He stopped talking, annoyed at the interruption. Janet's voice was steady and calm, the same tone she'd used 1,000 times when dealing with difficult situations. She told them she would fight the alien champion. The room went completely silent. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But Janet wasn't smiling. Her eyes held something the diplomats and officers had forgotten in their comfortable careers, something forged in survival and hardship. The ambassador tried to dismiss her gently, explaining this required a trained warrior. Janet didn't argue. She simply asked if they had anyone better who could arrive in 6 hours. The silence that followed was answer enough. As she methodically folded her apron and set down her cleaning supplies, King Voratha's image appeared on the main screen. He'd been monitoring their communications, listening to their panic. When he saw that a mere cleaning woman had volunteered, his laughter boomed through the speakers. He accepted immediately, eager to demonstrate human weakness before the real destruction began. Janet looked at that laughing alien king and felt nothing but calm determination. He thought he knew what humans were. He was about to learn something different. They transported Janet to the Krithan battle arena in a small shuttle that felt more like a prison transport than anything else. Through the viewport, she watched the massive structure grow larger as they approached. The arena was built from the bones of defeated enemies, or at least that's what the Krithan guards told her with obvious pride. Enormous skeletal remains formed the walls and pillars, bleached white by alien suns and arranged in patterns that were probably meant to be intimidating. It worked. Janet would be lying if she said her heart wasn't pounding as they led her through dark corridors where the walls seemed to press in from all sides. But fear was something she'd learned to work with over the years. You didn't make it disappear, you just didn't let it make your decisions for you. The holding area was a small cell with one stone bench. No weapons, no armor, nothing but the clothes on her back. Her standard station uniform, dark blue pants and a gray work shirt, both worn soft from countless washings. The comfortable sneakers she'd bought because they were good for standing all day. Not exactly battle gear, but then again, she wasn't exactly a battle warrior. Janet sat on the bench and stretched her legs, rolling her ankles the way she always did before a long shift. She could hear the crowd above, thousands of alien voices creating a rumble that vibrated through the stone. They were excited, waiting for the show. She wondered briefly if anyone from the human station was watching, then decided it didn't matter. She wasn't doing this for an audience. The door opened and a Krithan guard motioned for her to move. Time was up. Janet stood, took a deep breath, and walked toward the arena entrance. The tunnel sloped upward, growing brighter as she approached. Then she stepped out into the open and the noise hit her like a physical force. The arena was enormous, easily the size of 3 football fields. The floor was packed dirt mixed with sand, stained dark in patches she tried not to think too hard about. Those bone structures she'd seen from outside formed pillars and walls throughout the space, creating a maze of obstacles. Thousands of Krithans filled the seats rising up on all sides, their scales glinting in the harsh light. They jeered when they saw her, clearly disappointed by how ordinary she looked. King Vorath sat on a throne made from some creature's massive skull, elevated above everyone else. Next to him stood other important-looking Krithans wearing what Janet guessed were military decorations. They were all watching her with expressions ranging from amusement to outright contempt. Then the other gate opened across the arena and Janet got her first look at what she was actually facing. Drath was a nightmare made real. 12 feet of solid muscle covered in gray scales that looked like armored plates. 4 arms, each ending in hands that had claws instead of fingers. Those claws were metal, surgically implanted weapons that glinted like knives. His head was angular and sharp, with too many teeth visible even when his mouth was closed. But worst were his eyes, flat and black and completely empty of anything resembling mercy. The crowd roared approval as Drath entered, chanting something in their language that was probably his name or kill count or both. He raised all 4 arms and the noise got even louder. Then he looked across the arena at Janet and she saw the same contempt she'd seen on the king's face. She was an insult to him, beneath his notice. Good. Let him think that. A Krithan official floated down on some kind of hovering platform, announcing the rules in both languages. No rules, essentially. Fight until one couldn't continue. No time limit. No mercy expected or given. Victory or death. The official finished his speech and the platform lifted him back to safety. Janet and Drath stood at opposite ends of the arena. The silence stretched out, tension building. Janet rolled her shoulders, loosening muscles that had gotten tight during the wait. She bent down and retied one shoe that didn't really need retying, using the moment to scan the arena properly. Bone pillars of varying heights. Scattered debris from previous fights. Uneven ground that dipped and rose in places. She filed it all away. The starting horn blasted, a deep sound that echoed off the bone walls. Drath charged immediately, covering the distance between them with terrifying speed. The crowd cheered, already anticipating the quick kill. Janet didn't run. She watched him come, timing it like she'd timed 1,000 things before. At the absolute last second, when those metal claws were reaching for her throat, she stepped aside. Not a big dramatic move, just a simple sidestep with a slight turn, the same motion she'd used countless times to avoid collisions in narrow station corridors when someone came around a corner too fast. Dratha's momentum carried him forward. He tried to stop, all four arms windmilling, but the physics weren't on his side. He crashed face first into the bone wall with a sound like a car accident. The impact shook dust from the ancient bones and left the champion stunned for a precious few seconds. The crowd went quiet. That wasn't supposed to happen. Drath pushed himself up, shaking his head. He turned to face Janet again, and now the contempt in his eyes had been replaced with something else. Not quite anger yet, but confusion. How had such a small, weak creature avoided him? He approached more carefully this time, circling like a predator. Janet turned with him, keeping her distance, watching his feet and how he distributed his weight. She'd learned a long time ago that you could tell a lot about what someone was going to do by watching their feet. Drath lunged, not a full charge this time but a quick strike with his upper right arm. Janet ducked under it, the claws missing her head by inches. She could feel the wind from the blow. As she came up, she grabbed a piece of debris from the ground, a chunk of bone about the size of her forearm. She weighed it in her hand, testing its balance like she'd tested countless broom handles and mop poles over the years. Drath attacked again, using two arms this time in a coordinated strike meant to corner her. Janet moved backward, but not in panic. She'd walked backward plenty of times while mopping floors, and she knew how to do it without tripping. She let the bone pillars guide her movement, using them like she'd used station architecture during the lunar siege. The champion was getting frustrated now. He was trained in every fighting style from dozens of conquered worlds. He knew sophisticated combat techniques that had been refined over centuries. But Janet wasn't fighting like anyone he'd ever faced. She wasn't using techniques at all. She was just avoiding him, moving with the simple efficiency of someone who'd spent years navigating crowded spaces while carrying awkward loads. Drath roared and came at her with all four arms in a devastating combination attack. Janet dove behind a bone pillar and the claws scored deep gouges in the ancient surface instead of her flesh. She came up on the other side, breathing hard now but still focused. The crowd was murmuring, confused and uncertain. This wasn't the quick execution they'd expected. This strange human kept not being where she was supposed to be. She didn't fight with honor or technique. She just survived, moment by moment, using whatever was around her. Janet gripped her bone fragment tighter and kept moving. The real fight was just beginning, and she could see Drath starting to make mistakes. Frustration made people sloppy. She'd seen it 1,000 times in 1,000 different contexts. She just had to stay alive long enough to use it. 20 minutes into the fight, Janet's work shirt was soaked with sweat and her legs were burning from constant movement. But she was still standing, still breathing, and Drath was starting to look genuinely angry. That anger was exactly what she'd been waiting for. The champion had tried everything in his considerable arsenal. Coordinated strikes with all four arms. Feints designed to draw her into traps. Even attempting to use the bone pillars to pin her against walls. But Janet had spent 15 years navigating a space station during every kind of emergency imaginable. She knew how to read spaces, how to use tight corners and obstacles to her advantage. Every time Drath thought he had her cornered, she'd slip away through a gap he hadn't considered or duck under an attack he thought was unavoidable. The Krithan crowd had gone from cheering to confused murmuring to an almost uncomfortable silence. This wasn't how arena combat was supposed to work. Their champion, who had destroyed 300 opponents without breaking a sweat, was being made to look clumsy by a middle-aged human woman in work clothes. Janet used the environment like she'd learned to use everything else in her life, turning limitations into advantages. When Drath charged, she led him toward areas where the ground was uneven, where his greater size and weight worked against him. When he tried to use his reach advantage, she stayed close to the bone pillars where his four arms became a hindrance instead of an asset in the confined space. She dropped the first bone fragment after using it to deflect a claw strike that would have opened her shoulder to the bone. Now she picked up a new piece, this one longer and slightly curved. She tested its weight and balance while circling away from another attack. In her hands, it wasn't a weapon exactly. It was a tool, and Janet had been using tools her whole life. Dratha's breathing had changed, getting heavier and more ragged. He wasn't used to fights that lasted this long. Most of his opponents either died quickly or gave up when they realized they couldn't win. But Janet had never learned how to give up. Life had tried to beat that lesson into her more times than she could count, and it hadn't taken yet. The champion tried a new strategy, attempting to use his superior strength to destroy the pillars she kept hiding behind. His metal claws tore through ancient bone, sending fragments flying. Janet shielded her face and moved to another pillar, then another. Drath followed, demolishing each one, clearly trying to eliminate her advantages. What he didn't realize was that every pillar he destroyed left debris on the arena floor. Sharp fragments of bone, pieces of various sizes, all scattered across the sand like a minefield that Janet was learning to navigate while Drath wasn't paying attention to where he stepped. She'd learned improvisation during the Denver riots when her apartment building's water supply had been cut off. She'd figured out how to collect condensation, filter questionable water through layers of cloth, and ration drops like they were gold. During the lunar siege, she turned cleaning supplies into makeshift weapons and first aid tools. During the Arctic colony collapse, she'd used furniture and wall panels to create insulation that had saved 3 people from freezing to death. Now she was doing what she'd always done, working with what she had instead of wishing for what she didn't have. Drath lunged again, and this time Janet didn't just dodge. She moved forward instead of back, getting inside his reach where those long arms couldn't generate proper force. She jabbed the curved bone piece at his knee joint, not hard enough to cause real damage but enough to make him shift his weight awkwardly. As he stumbled, she was already moving away, picking up 2 smaller bone fragments as she went. The champion roared in genuine frustration now. He was being defeated by someone who shouldn't even be able to survive against him, let alone win. His training, his 300 victories, his fearsome reputation, none of it mattered against someone who fought without technique or honor or any recognizable combat style. Janet fought like someone whose only goal was to make it to the end of her shift. No wasted movement, no dramatic flourishes, just steady persistence and practical problem solving. When Drath went high, she went low. When he tried to overpower her, she redirected his force. When he set traps, she simply didn't go where he wanted her to go. An hour had passed now. Janet's body was screaming at her, every muscle burning with fatigue. Her hands were cut from handling rough bone fragments. Her right ankle had twisted slightly on uneven ground and was starting to swell. But pain was just information, and she'd learned to work through worse during double shifts when the station was understaffed. Drath was showing signs of fatigue too, and more importantly, his attacks were getting sloppy. Frustration had overridden training. He was making mistakes, committing too fully to strikes, leaving himself off balance. Janet had seen this pattern before in angry drunks who'd tried to start fights in the station bar. They'd flail wildly for a while, then tire themselves out, and that's when they became vulnerable. She started pressing slightly more, forcing Drath to react instead of attack. She'd throw bone fragments at his head, making him raise his arms to block, then immediately move to a better position while his vision was obscured. She'd feint toward one side, getting him to commit his weight, then exploit the opening on the other side. The champion tried to reset, backing up to catch his breath and reassess. But Janet had learned something important during her years of watching people. Once someone started doubting themselves, that doubt grew like a cancer. She could see it in how Drath moved now, the slight hesitation before each attack, the way he second-guessed his instincts. King Vorith was leaning forward on his throne now, no longer laughing. The other Krithan officials were talking among themselves in urgent whispers. This wasn't supposed to happen. Their champion was supposed to be invincible. Janet picked up another bone fragment, this one short and thick like a club. She could barely lift her arms anymore, but she didn't need to lift them high. She just needed to wait for the right moment. Patience was another thing life had taught her. Sometimes the best action was to wait until the perfect opportunity presented itself. Drath charged one more time, putting everything into a final overwhelming assault. All 4 arms struck at once from different angles, metal claws flashing in the harsh arena light. It was a killing blow that no one should have been able to avoid. But Janet had been waiting for him to overcommit exactly like this. She dropped flat to the ground, letting all 4 strikes pass over her through empty air. As Dratha's momentum carried him forward and his arms were extended and vulnerable, she rolled and swung her makeshift club at his leading ankle with every bit of strength she had left. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms, but she felt and heard something in Dratha's leg give way. The champion went down hard, crashing face first into the arena floor. He tried to get up, but his damaged leg couldn't support his weight. He collapsed again, roaring in pain and rage. Janet stood slowly, every part of her body hurting. She raised the bone club, ready to end it if she had to, but hoping she wouldn't. She'd spent too many years cleaning up after violence to enjoy causing it. The arena had gone completely silent. Then King Vorith himself rose from his throne and began descending to the arena floor. The fight was over. King Vorith descended into the arena on his hovering platform, his red eyes fixed on Janet with an expression she couldn't quite read. The crowd remained silent, thousands of Krithans watching their king approach the human who had just done the impossible. Medical personnel rushed past the king to attend to Drath, who was still on the ground, his pride more damaged than his body. Janet stood her ground, still holding the bone fragment even though her arms felt like they were made of lead. She was exhausted, hurting, and honestly just wanted to sit down, but something told her that showing weakness now would be a mistake. So she stayed on her feet, meeting the alien king's gaze as he stepped off his platform and walked toward her. Up close, Vorith was even more intimidating than he'd appeared on the screens. He towered over her, easily twice her height, his scaled body radiating power and authority. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but she could hear anger bubbling underneath. He demanded to know her rank. What level of warrior she held in the human military. What honors she'd earned in battle. What famous victories she'd won. The questions came rapid fire, each one expecting an answer that would make sense of what had just happened. Janet let him finish before responding. She told him the truth in the same calm voice she'd used to volunteer back on the station. She wasn't military. She had no rank. She'd never been in a battle before today. She was a maid, a cleaning woman, someone who mopped floors and emptied trash bins and scrubbed toilets for a living. The king stared at her like she'd just spoken in a language he couldn't comprehend. Then he laughed, but it wasn't the amused laughter from before. This was harsh and disbelieving. He accused her of lying, of mocking him. Surely she was some kind of special forces operative using a clever cover story. No mere servant could defeat his champion. Janet was too tired to be diplomatic. She told him to check the station records if he didn't believe her. 15 years of cleaning schedules, performance reviews, and payroll data. She even told him her supervisor's name, David Chen, who would probably be really confused about why an alien king was calling to verify her employment history. The arena stayed quiet enough to hear a pin drop. King Vorith's expression shifted through several emotions, confusion giving way to something that looked almost like fear. He turned to his advisors and barked orders in his own language. Several of them rushed off to presumably do exactly what Janet had suggested. While they waited, the king began circling her slowly, studying her like she was some kind of puzzle he couldn't solve. He asked how she trained. Janet told him about carrying heavy equipment up and down station corridors for hours. He asked about her combat education. She mentioned the self-defense class she'd taken 20 years ago but admitted she'd forgotten most of it. He asked about her tactical training. She shrugged and said she'd learned to think on her feet during emergencies, nothing formal. Each answer seemed to disturb Vorith more than the last. His worldview was built on a foundation of warrior superiority, the idea that strength and combat skill determined worth. The strong ruled, the weak served. It was simple, logical, and apparently completely wrong when it came to humans. One of his advisors returned and whispered urgently in his ear. Vorith's expression darkened. Janet's story had checked out. She really was just a cleaning woman. No military training, no secret warrior background, nothing that explained how she'd beaten Drath except sheer survival instinct and improvisation. The king turned back to Janet and asked the question that was clearly eating at him. If she wasn't humanity's strongest warrior, then who was? Where did she rank among human fighters? Was she at least in the top 100? Top 1,000? Janet almost laughed at that, though she was too tired to actually do it. She explained that she wasn't ranked anywhere because she wasn't a fighter at all. There were thousands, probably millions of humans who were stronger, faster, and better trained than her. Professional soldiers, athletes, martial artists, people who actually knew what they were doing in a fight. She was just someone who'd lived through some hard times and learned to keep going no matter what. The king demanded she explain the contradiction. How could someone so ordinary by human standards defeat his champion? What secret advantage did she possess? Janet thought about how to answer that. She'd never really put it into words before, never had to explain something that seemed so obvious to her. Finally, she told him that humans didn't become strong through conquest or combat training alone. They became strong through surviving things that tried to kill them. She explained that Earth wasn't like other worlds. It was a death world where everything from the weather to the bacteria to the animals was constantly trying to end you. Humans had survived ice ages that should have wiped them out. They'd survived plagues that killed half their population and kept going. They'd survived wars so terrible they'd nearly destroyed their entire civilization multiple times. They'd survived because the ones who couldn't adapt, couldn't improvise, couldn't keep going when things looked hopeless, those people didn't make it. And the ones who did survive passed that stubborn refusal to quit down to their children. Every human alive, she told him, was descended from thousands of generations of survivors. It was in their DNA, their culture, their basic psychology. They didn't give up. They couldn't give up. When things got bad, humans got creative. They turned anything into a tool, any space into a shelter, any situation into something they could work with. Vorith listened with growing unease. He ordered his scholars brought to the arena, demanded they access human historical records immediately. While Janet sat down on a chunk of fallen pillar because her legs literally couldn't hold her anymore, Krithan researchers began pulling up information about Earth's history. What they found clearly shook them. They discovered humans had nearly gone extinct multiple times. Climate disasters, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, self-inflicted near-apocalypses. Each time, humans had been reduced to tiny populations barely clinging to existence. And each time, they'd somehow clawed their way back. The researchers found records of the world wars, conflicts so brutal and widespread that other species couldn't comprehend how humanity had survived them. They found documentation of diseases that had killed hundreds of millions but never quite managed to finish the job. They found evidence of famines, floods, earthquakes, and every other disaster imaginable. And through it all, humans had just kept going. They'd adapted to every environment on their planet, from frozen wastelands to burning deserts to thin mountain air. They'd learned to eat almost anything, survive on minimal resources, and thrive in conditions that would kill most other species. One scholar brought up something that made King Vorith go very still. Humans, the report said, were the only species known to have domesticated wolves, one of their planet's apex predators. Not through superior strength but through patience, strategy, and mutual benefit. They turned their predators into their partners. Another scholar noted that human endurance was abnormal compared to other species. They could run for days, go without sleep for extended periods, and survive injuries that would be fatal to most other beings. Their bodies were built for persistence hunting, literally chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Janet listened to all this with detached interest. She'd never thought of humans as particularly special. Everyone she knew was just doing their best to get through life. But hearing it laid out like this, seeing these powerful aliens react with genuine fear to humanity's history, it gave her a new perspective. King Vorith turned back to her, and now there was no contempt in his eyes. Only a wary respect mixed with something that looked like dread. He asked one final question. If Janet was ordinary by human standards, if there were millions stronger than her, what would happen if humanity actually sent their real warriors? Janet met his gaze steadily. She told him she hoped he'd never have to find out. King Vorith stood in the center of his arena, surrounded by the evidence of his champion's defeat, and faced a problem he'd never encountered before. According to the combat rules, he had to honor the outcome. Humanity had won their trial by combat, which meant his fleet would withdraw and Earth would be spared. But how could he return to his empire and explain that a cleaning woman had defeated their greatest warrior? His advisors gathered around him, speaking in urgent whispers. Some suggested finding a loophole in the rules. Others proposed attacking anyway and claiming the human had cheated somehow. But Vorith had built his reputation on honor and the warrior's code. If he broke his word now, every species in the galaxy would know. His empire's foundation would crack. Then one of his counselors suggested something different. Offer the human a position as an advisor. Claimed that her unique fighting philosophy intrigued him and he wished to learn from her methods. It would save face, make the defeat look like a deliberate test rather than a humiliation, and perhaps actually give them insight into human combat thinking. Vorith seized on the idea. He turned to Janet, who was still sitting on the broken pillar catching her breath, and made his offer. She would be given a high rank in his court, wealth beyond measure, a place of honor among his people. She would teach his warriors, advise his generals, and be celebrated across the empire. Janet listened politely, then shook her head. She told him no. The king blinked, clearly not expecting refusal. He sweetened the offer, adding more titles and promises. Janet still said no. Vorith's confusion deepened into something close to anger. He demanded to know why she would refuse such honor. Janet's answer was simple. She had a job back on the station. People depended on her. The cleaning crew was already short-staffed, and if she didn't show up for her shift, someone else would have to cover for her, and that wasn't fair to them. The station didn't clean itself. The absolute silence that followed was somehow more profound than anything that had happened during the fight. Here was power and wealth being offered, everything most beings in the galaxy would fight wars to obtain, and this human was turning it down because she didn't want to leave her co-workers in a difficult position. King Voratha's expression went through several changes. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to something that looked almost like pain. He asked if she understood what she was refusing. Janet said she did, but her answer wouldn't change. She appreciated the offer, but she was needed at home. That word, home, seemed to hit the king harder than anything else. His empire spanned dozens of systems, commanded billions of subjects, controlled resources beyond counting. But this ordinary human had something he suddenly realized his empire lacked, a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with power or conquest. Vorath made his decision. He would honor the combat results and withdraw his fleet. But more than that, he declared that human space would be off-limits to Krithan expansion indefinitely. Not because he feared human warriors, though he was beginning to, but because his people didn't understand humans at all. And attacking something you didn't understand was foolish, not brave. He told Janet she was free to go. Medical personnel offered to treat her injuries, and she accepted that much at least. While they worked on her twisted ankle and wrapped her cut hands, the king watched with an expression that might have been respect or might have been worry. Probably both. The shuttle ride back to the diplomatic station felt surreal. Janet dozed most of the way, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that the adrenaline had worn off. When they arrived, she expected some kind of celebration or at least acknowledgement. Instead, Ambassador Hayes met her at the docking bay with paperwork about the incident that needed her signature and a reminder that she'd missed her shift. The next few days were strange. News of what happened spread quickly through human space. Journalists wanted interviews. Military analysts wanted to study her techniques. Politicians wanted to use her story for various agendas. Janet declined all of it. She went back to work, picked up her cleaning cart, and returned to her regular routine. But things had changed in small ways. The station crew treated her differently now. Not with fear or exactly, but with a new kind of awareness. Diplomats held doors for the cleaning staff. Officers said good morning to maintenance workers. People who had walked past service personnel for years suddenly saw them as actual human beings. Janet's story spread beyond official channels too. On social media, among service workers and blue-collar laborers across human space, her name became something like a legend. Not because she was special, but because she proved that ordinary people had strength nobody gave them credit for. In the maintenance break room, where Janet ate her lunch every day, someone had put up a picture from the arena. She'd asked them to take it down several times, but it kept reappearing. Her co-workers were proud, even if she was embarrassed by the attention. Out in Krithan space, King Vorath had returned to his throne world and immediately ordered a complete review of human capabilities. His military intelligence division began extensive research into Earth's history, culture, and potential threat level. What they discovered didn't comfort him. Humans, the reports concluded, were individually less physically capable than Krithans. But they possessed something more dangerous than strength. They had adaptability, creativity, and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat that bordered on pathological. They turned everything into a weapon, every setback into a lesson, every loss into motivation to try harder next time. More disturbing was the psychological profile. Humans bonded strongly with each other, even across genetic lines and cultural differences. That cleaning woman hadn't fought for personal glory or survival. She'd fought for people she'd probably never meet, billions of strangers on a planet she could barely see from her space station. That kind of tribal loyalty extending to an entire species was unprecedented. The Krithan Empire quietly began avoiding human space. Not officially, nothing that would appear in treaties or declarations. But trade routes shifted, exploration missions detoured around human colonies, and military planners removed Earth from target lists. The decision was sold as strategic patience, but everyone understood what it really was. Uncertainty. Fear of the unknown. Back on the diplomatic station, Janet finished her shift and headed home to her small quarters. Her daughter had sent another message asking her to please come visit Earth and meet the grandchildren in person. Janet pulled up the video of two small children waving at the camera and smiled. Maybe she'd put in for vacation time next month. She looked out her window at the stars, thinking about the alien king and his empire. She wondered if he'd learned anything useful from their encounter. She hoped so. Violence was exhausting, and she'd prefer if everyone just found ways to get along. But if they didn't, if someone else came looking for a fight, well, humanity would still be here. They'd survived ice ages and plagues and wars and every other disaster that Death World had thrown at them. They'd survived by being too stubborn to quit, too creative to be cornered, and too connected to each other to ever truly stand alone. Janet Morrison, cleaning professional and accidental warrior, turned away from the window and got ready for bed. She had another shift tomorrow, and the station always needed someone to keep things running. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work, and someone had to do it. Might as well be her. And if the galaxy had learned something about humanity in the process, well, that was just a bonus.